So I'll do an introduction. Thank you for joining us, Denny. You are a very insightful guest because you are uh, somebody who's been on the inside, and yet you were not recruited by the International Churches of Christ.
Right.
You did see Crossroads through quite a long time, so you have a lot of knowledge there. And so, again, welcome. And
Thank you.
all right. So my co-host Michael can't make it, so I'll just be doing the questions. So tell us a bit. You joined slightly before Kip McKean joined at the 14th Street Church of Christ in
Yes,
1972.
yes, I did. I visited um, 14th Street probably about mid to late April of 1970. I actually was invited as a result of a blind date, which is kind of a funny story in itself. But me and my best friend used to get plastered every weekend. And so one weekend, Bob said, "Well, what do we do next weekend?" Or I said, I guess I said it. He said, "Here's an idea. Let's either get dates or try pot." So um, I was well known in my dorm area because I worked in the snack bar and I was kind of a little bit of a out of myself kind of person. And so all the people in the dorm area would come in and I'd be flipping burgers or I would be running the cash register thing. And so I just called a random number that knew would ring in one of the girls' dorms and figured that whoever picked up would probably know who I was. And so I said, "Hey, this is Denny from the Pit." That was the name of the place where I worked, which is kind of interesting because later on I saw a hymn that was called "He Lifted Me Out of the Pit." But anyway, so I said, "Anybody over there want to go on a date with me this weekend?" And she put down the phone. All of the phones were right by the doors as you walked into the dorm rooms. Put down the phone and said, "Hey, anybody want to go on a date with Denny?" And somebody said, "I will." So her name was Vicky Greer. We went out on the date and we went to see the movie MASH.
Mm-hmm.
And this was 1970. And I guess it was the original movie MASH that had come out. And I'm enjoying the movie. And afterwards, we went to have coffee. And so I said, "So, how do you like the movie?" Thinking that she was going to say, "Yeah, it was." She said, "Well, actually, I was very offended by it." I said, "Okay." She said, "I'm a new Christian. And if you remember the movie, you ever saw it, they're making fun of some guy who's a Christian." So, of course, I said, "Oh, I'm a Christian. I was the vice president of my youth group in high school, and I also played the organ at church." So, that was my credentials. Truthfully, I didn't even know what a Christian was. So she invited me to church. We went. It was kind of an interesting thing. I didn't realize that we were in Sunday school when I went because I thought Sunday school was for kids. We went and we were in a room upstairs. It was a college group. There was probably, I think, about 30 or 40 of us. Um, Old timers, names that some of whom you would know, like Tom Brown, J.P. Tynes, um, Andy Van Buren. You might have heard that name before, but those were some of the people that were there. And when it was over, it was funny. We went downstairs, and I thought I was going home, and said, "Oh no, it's time for the worship service." So we went to the worship service. Sitting there before it starts, and I see these curtains up behind the stage, and I asked my friend, "Is that where the organ is?" And no, that was where the baptistry was. So it was. But the interesting thing is that the message, I felt like she had maybe called Chuck Lucas up and told him about me because the message was so directly hit me. It obviously
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, but I remember the nature of the message was talking about having a seared conscience. And he talked about, things that you once would have not considered doing and then you did do, and then but you felt guilty and then you didn't feel guilty anymore. And it was just, and then, he talked about grace and Jesus, and I go, "Hey, I like this. I'll come back." And 2 weeks later, I was actually in a meeting that I shouldn't even have been at, but somehow I thought I was supposed to. And it was a meeting between Campus Advance, which was the the college group, the Navigators, and Campus Crusade. And it was some of the student leaders that were talking about, can we work together or not? And you can probably guess what the outcome of that finally was. But I'm sitting there going, everybody in this room has something I don't have, and I want it. So I said to my friend whose room it was in, I just said, I want this. And he looked at me and said, well, do you want to be baptized? And I said, yeah. So we hopped in the car. It's 10:30 at night, drive to 14th Street. Somebody gets a hold of Chuck. He shows up with a key. Other people just start, some are riding bikes from campus who just showing up. Pretty soon, maybe small crowd, 25 people. And I'm baptized. No studies, no sin list. No, it was just like kind of you would think of in the first century. And I go, dang, I feel loved, I feel a part of, and I feel like, I'm a new start. What's really funny is that after it was over, one of the gals hugged me and said, see you tomorrow night. And I'm going, this is Tuesday. What's tomorrow night? Oh, we have church. So I went, and that was kind of the nature of the way things sort of were. Most of the baptisms during the week, or, between Sundays, were at night. Somebody'd be wanting to be baptized, and people would just put the word out, run down to the church, or maybe in some cases, to an apartment complex where there was a pool and baptize.
Mhm.
It was simple. It was simple.
Yeah, I got the sense. I think we talked about this before, and even in your story that you gave now, that at the beginning, Chuck, of course, took over in 1967. So this is still relatively early on in the 14th Street Church of Christ section of the history, that it was still very almost dynamic, or it was kind of like more maybe a little bit more spirit led or things like that. It wasn't as institutionalized, and people got together because they wanted to.
Very much so. We were just having a good time being saved,
Hmm.
and we were developing new friends. There was nobody was saying, well, did you bring anybody to soul? I didn't even know what a soul talk was until after I was baptized. And this was the end of the school year, and I was going home for the summer, but I remember that either that spring or maybe back in the fall or something, that we might be Sunday night or Wednesday night after church kind of hanging out, on the front steps of the church or something, just kind of hanging out, talking. Somebody'd say, hey, why don't we go over to the Plaza of the Americas and have a devotional? Plaza of the Americas is place on campus. It's also where all the speakers would go when riots would start, back in the civil rights era and stuff like that, or when we were having walkouts at campus or some kind of thing. But the plaza was known for that. But it was also just a neat kind of like a park. And so we'd go over there, anybody that wanted to sit in a circle on the ground, start singing, praying. It was very, very just I don't know, just unscripted,
Hmm.
unscripted. And
Yeah.
and we were just, as I like to say, we were just having fun being saved. And the dynamic of that is that, and I've always believed that the best people to bring people to Christ are the people who just came themselves, because they have
Hmm.
this circle of friends who know them, know what they've been like, and and then maybe watch them change and are curious. I know that in that period of time, I was constantly bringing my friends to church because I had found something, and I go, you might like this. It wasn't like, okay, I've got this quota that nothing like that. It
Great,
wasn't
great.
anything like that. And we grew exponentially during that period of time,
Hmm.
when it was just, you know, come and see what I found.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then I believe at this time in 1972, you move away from Gainesville, and you also became the youth minister.
what happened was is that I was going to be a foreign language teacher,
Mhm.
and we would have to go all when we were you would have to go and you would have to intern someplace. And so
Mm.
usually, because we all had one counselor at UF that was over us, they would send us, all of us, to one particular county. You didn't know until kind of came up, and I ended up going to Duval County, which was good because that was close by, and everything. So the first Sunday I was there, I showed up at a church where the summer before Sam Lang had been the, what they called them, youth directors, and the churches would hire college kids or somebody like that to gather all the teens together during the summer. They get all rallied up, and then they'd leave, go back to school. And so things would kind of, you know, and this was a kind of a common thing. And so Sam Lang had been there the year before. And so I knew it was a church that was, kind of on the Crossroads friendly list, or the 14th Street friendly list,
Mm.
because some college students would go there during summer or break or whatever. There was two churches. The one I went to was San Jose Church, and the other one was Riverside Church. Riverside Church was the home, ultimately the home, well, initially the home of J.P. Tynes, whom you might know that name. He grew up
Right.
in that church. And then Tom Brown, uh, after he became a Christian, he attended that church. And then he actually went there, I think, that same summer, and was the youth director there, if I remember correctly. But what happened was I just went, I, uh, I called up the preacher just to talk to him and ask him what time service was. I called the church, and he happened to be there studying. We started talking, and he had said, "Hey, I'm about to go to dinner. Would you like to go to dinner with me?" So we went out to dinner. We just talked. I told him my story. His name was Joe Schubert, by the way. And some of his sons are like very big at Abilene. I think one might have been the president or something. Joe was a really cool guy. He had young kids, and
Mhm.
he had a favorable feeling towards 14th Street. And so I said, I want to get involved. Can I help out some way? And he said, well, maybe you can help us out with these teenagers. We have a list of them that basically, after summer was over, just stopped coming. So they gave me the list. So I started calling them up individually and saying, hey, you know, would you like to come back? I didn't know I had no idea what I was doing. I had been a Christian
Mhm.
for less than 2 years. And so I said, why don't we have Friday night devotionals? So we had Friday night devotionals, and pretty soon we got too big for the room we were in. And we started having them in different people's homes, and then those got too small. So we went back to church, and finally we were actually having them outdoors. And it was the same kind of thing, like bring your friends, whatever. And I did do a meeting during the week where we went through the same kind of things that we had done at Crossroads in our Acts class. They had called it the Vanguard class. I don't know if you ever heard
Mhm.
that. And we just memorized a bunch of just basic scriptures. Um, and then we just talked about, I taught about, the early church, baptism, the scriptures about that, and then during that period of time, that there had become a big push in some of the churches to go kind of charismatic.
Mm.
And
Right.
so it was kind of weird. And so Joe Schubert, who was that preacher that I talked about, had done a 5-part series on the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues and stuff like that. So I incorporated that and just kind of came up with this class that people came to on Tuesday nights, and we memorized scripture, talked together, and and it just kind of solidified people a little bit more in their faith, and it just kept growing. And so when summer came, they asked me if I would like to be their summer youth director. Sure,
Right.
why not? They're going to pay me $100 a week. And there was a family that was letting me stay with them, so that was pretty good. So I'm doing that, and I finished my internship, and I went to try to get a job, and I thought, sure, I would get this job at the high school where I've been teaching, because I had interned there. The teacher was leaving. The students had improved under my deal and everything else. So I went and applied. And I guess I could say this on here, but I was told by the principal I had everything I needed except for one thing. Whatever it is, I'll do it. He said, can't. Every hire we have this year has to be Black.
Oh,
So
goodness.
that was kind of going on then. So in the meantime, I was struggling to try to find a job in education, and the elders came to me and said, we'd like to keep you on, and would you be willing? And I go, I'm really enjoying this. I don't know what I'm doing exactly, but we're just doing basic stuff. We're getting together, we're doing the kind of thing that I was having fun doing in Gainesville, and it was attracting kids. And so I continued, and I thought, okay, this is it for now. And uh, in the fall, there's a big game between the Gators and Georgia, you might have heard of, and it's at the Gator
Yeah, yep.
Bowl every year. And so a number of people from pre my time at 14th Street, like people who knew the elders, and then other people who had come through 14th Street that lived in Jacksonville, would always get together. It would be barbecue. And so they invited me to come. Why not? So there was a lot of people there. Some I knew their kids or whatever. And the elders took me aside and said, would you be interested in maybe coming to Gainesville and starting youth ministry next year after we move into our new building? Maybe, sure. For me, that
Right.
was like the job of all jobs. I get to go back to the place where I started, the most wonderful place I'd ever been.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's how it got started. That's how I got there.
Great. So that, you talked about the new building. That was when it became from the 14th
Crossroads.
Street Church of Christ and it became Crossroads, right?
Right.
And and of course, at that time, it was Crossroads was expanding. So that's part where they needed the new building. And there was a new assistant as well to Chuck Lucas in the student ministry. So that was Kip McKean at that time in 1972.
Well, actually, in '72, Sam Lang had just recently become the campus minister.
Okay.
When I became a Christian, Chuck Lucas, 3 months before that, had switched, or I think 3 weeks before that, in '70, had switched from being the campus minister to being the preacher, and they had fired the preacher, or
Mm,
he left. I don't really know the circumstances. And so when I came along, there was a transition period, and there wasn't a campus minister those few weeks. And then J.P. Tynes took it over in the fall of '70 as a student. He was in grad school and stuff like that. And then Sam Lane became the actual thing. But yes, during the period I was gone, this guy named Kip McKean had been baptized and was a very bigger than life kind of presence that was there when I came back.
and he was also your assistant, was that correct? At one point?
He was assigned to me. Yeah, I was going to get together a group of people, mainly people that I had known before, to, you know, help with me in the youth ministry. Our youth ministry here, they'd never had one. They never even had a summer one. So there was the high school, there was 13 kids in the high school roster, so to speak, 12 of whom had no desire to be there. And then there were some junior high kids as well. But those groups had pretty much not, there had been no effort made in terms of growing those groups. And some of them were resentful, and some just didn't want any part of it. So I used to say I started with negative 13. And so I was going to choose some people and Chuck made it very clear that anybody that I chose to work in my ministry had to be passed through him.
Hmm.
So I submitted a couple of names, and he said, "No, I want you to have this guy, Kip McKean. He's going to help you." And so uh, I learned kind of quickly when I went back to Gainesville that it wasn't what I was expecting. There had been a huge change in that 1 year to the point where I didn't even think I recognized the place once I got there.
Yeah, you
And
mentioned this.
yeah, it had been this chill kind of thing where we dressed casually, we all wore our bell bottoms, we had our long hair, just it was the hippie days. Sandals or whatever, and I go back, and all of a sudden, particularly the people who are doing the Lord's Supper, are all in suits and ties. Going,
Right.
well, that's different. And suddenly, what was a real casual thing became much more, you know, scripted, I guess you would say, or we
Right.
would have flowers, and every Wednesday after we would have dinner with the elders. The staff and the elders would meet at Morrison's restaurant, and the first thing we would do when we came back was Chuck would go in and check how the flowers were left over from Sunday to make sure they look good. Things like this
Right.
that, like just were that was just different. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but it was like suddenly, the new building brought this new atmosphere, I guess.
And
And
I think I was going to ask you, wasn't it the case you found out that some of it was just Chuck Lucas wanted it a certain way in terms of like the flowers and the communion servers and suits and ties?
yeah, I don't think that came from the elders.
Mhm.
But I mean, we had our building had been a rundown place, and all of a sudden you got a new one. So it's not that uncommon to think, okay, we're going to make this nicer and everything. But it became a place I didn't recognize. It
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
much more. It wasn't the laid back kind of thing. And then Kip was a new dimension. Tom Brown had been the person when I left, that was kind of a bigger than life personality, but very well liked. But he would lead singing, and um he had actually been my soul talk leader
Mhm.
the the 6 months before I left, or a period of time before I left in the dorm. And we had lots of visitors. He was well liked, and we had great discussion and stuff like that. And so he had kind of been that figure, and then Kip came along, and it was a different kind of personality. It wasn't as natural as Tom's. It was
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think, kind of forced. But he definitely got Chuck's eye, and
Mhm.
Chuck
Mhm.
felt like that he needed to be in there. And it didn't take me long to figure out that Chuck didn't really think that I was the one for the job.
Right.
I had no idea. If I had known what I came to know, I probably wouldn't have come, because I expected this big welcome and things like that. And it wasn't like that at all. There was definitely a line drawn between the campus ministry and the youth ministry, and the youth ministry was just over here in the back. But I couldn't do much unless I conferred with Chuck first.
Right. Right. I think you hinted at that a little bit in terms of like there's certainly Chuck's people and the people he wanted, and then that he approved of, and then the other people, I guess we could say that. And I think over the next few years, then did you become increasingly uncomfortable with the dynamics at Crossroads?
I did. Um, a lot of what I experienced was more what I heard, because I was kind of in my own little circle running my ministry, although I was definitely under Chuck's authority, I guess you would say. But he wasn't as much interested in that as he was in the other. And I did a lot of other things besides youth ministry. I was put in charge of Vacation Bible School,
Right.
which had never been a big thing. And the first year I did it, we had, I think, over 500 kids. And the last year I did it, when I was there, we had 1,000, and we sent out buses and we did all kinds of things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and that was good. And I involved myself. I was in the original Crossroads Singers and traveled with them and things like that. But the discomfort I felt was just, it seemed like that we were trying to create this Crossroads image, and there was more and more emphasis that I was hearing about, not so much experiencing, about having to have advice about this, advice about that, that sort of thing in the prayer partner realm. And
Right.
when I first became a Christian, prayer partners were just that, just got together, sat down, talked about what's going on, prayed. It
Mhm.
wasn't a senior prayer partner and a junior prayer partner. It wasn't that, that kind of thing. And it seemed like that things were becoming more and more forced, um, more and more accountability in terms of, we started having soul talk leaders meeting. Well, how many visitors did you have? Or, this
Right.
sort of thing. Um, and the truth is that before that occurred, I think percentage wise, we were having more visitors and more baptisms.
Hmm.
I don't know if
Ironic.
the numbers are exactly right on this, but I think in our 14th Street days, percentage wise, I think we grew more from the basis of how many people we had and how many people were baptized. But that number wasn't as big as the 300 that when we reached the point of having 900 members or something. But there was definitely more pressure to be on that list of the top baptizing churches, and
You mentioned.
and then just more controlling kinds of things, um, which I was uncomfortable with, and ultimately led me to look for an opportunity to leave.
Right. Right. So some of the controlling issues you mentioned, like there were suddenly double dating that was required, or more than, you couldn't just go out if I was a single guy, which I'm not, fortunately, but I'd have to go seek another couple to join me. And then also the idea of getting advice, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, and while I was uncomfortable to the degree that it was in the 70s as I was leaving, and also I felt like there was too much focus on Chuck,
Hmm. Hmm.
like, kissing up to Chuck is what I would call it, and Kip was, oh, he, if he have an opportunity to speak, it's always like, oh, and Chuck is the most wonderful thing that got, and it's go, I don't think that helped Chuck, you know, and Chuck was human. He was a good preacher, he had started something that was growing and stuff like that. But in an effort, I think, for Kip to be prominent, he would just make all these statements and stuff like that. And then other people started in, and you know, I think that other people were complicit in turning Chuck into the person that he became, because they were looking for something for themselves, is what I think. I mean,
Right.
we had a person who, he and his wife got married. He married a person on the staff, and we're at the rehearsal dinner, and he brings in this antique piece of furniture, as like a surprise to give to Chuck for performing the wedding. And then come to find out, he and his wife are going on a cruise, and they take all the wedding party with him and Chuck and Ann, and it's like, what in the world? And so I don't know, sometime around that happened, I found out that he had a way to get a discount at a antique store, and I was looking for a bookcase. So we get down to the store, and I find something I like, and he tells me how much it's going to cost with his discount. I said, "Great, I'll go ahead and get it." He said, "No, no, why don't we do this? I'll tell your teenagers for your birthday that this is something you might like, and we can surprise you with it." I said, "What?" He said, well, that's what we do with Chuck. Because there would be some kind of thing, and this extravagant gift would appear. And it was, oh, and come to find out it was staged. I'm going, people like this didn't help him.
Right, right. Yeah, certainly you've noticed a certain dynamic, maybe an attitude within Chuck that was growing over this time. I think you mentioned it was a certain type of arrogance that he had. Um,
Yeah, I think, he became more and more, I guess you could say, on a pedestal.
mhm, yeah,
And with that, I felt like became an arrogance.
mhm,
And that for some people, he wasn't very approachable unless you're in the circle, and I
mm,
wasn't in the circle, you know, um, it, and the more I saw that, I go, I don't want to be in the circle because it seemed cliquish and everything. Later, I learned things that I was totally unaware of. I never even
right,
suspected.
right.
Um, but I reached a point where, to me, this isn't Christ-like. This isn't godly. I don't want to. I don't want to make my ministry look like this with the
Mhm,
teenagers. And I tried to keep my best, but I know that I was probably influenced in certain directions to perform in terms of numbers. And it got harder and harder when the newspaper would start pick up articles and would be on TV and stuff like that, uh, to be able to get teenagers to come to our activities because they had parents that they had to answer to.
yeah,
So that made it more difficult. I don't know how I got around to that, but I do know that the last year I was there, I was called in at the beginning of the year because my youth ministry had only had 9 baptisms the previous year,
oh,
which wasn't very much. But what was happening is that we were getting all of this media focused. That's back in the days when people read the newspaper, and then we had the Alligator, which was the student newspaper, and it was almost daily got stuff in there about you know cult and all this kind of stuff. And some of it was exaggerated, but still, you know, the kids that I was working with would have to get permission from their parents to come to church. And it's like, you ain't going there.
mhm,
But anyway, I was told that if things didn't change, that I'd get fired. And Chuck told me that, not the elders. But I was already in my heart on the way out. My problem was I had a girlfriend that we'd been dating for a long time, and because of the nature of the situation, I did not talk to her about how I felt because I was afraid that was going to break up our relationship.
right.
So I just kind of just tried to stay out of in the shadows and do my thing and grow my youth ministry. I did grow the youth ministry from the -13 to over 100 during the 6.5 years we were there. So
Right. Mhm. So your final year was 1979, and this is
yes,
where you moved to Tulsa, and
yeah,
somebody at the Burnett Road Church of Christ heard about your abilities, I guess, with also your bus ministry, and they had a bus ministry as well. So I guess
yes,
that's where you went for a little bit.
I did. I I just happened to have gotten to know a guy named Ron Swadley, who passed away just a few months ago, who had started from scratch, having gone someplace, seen a bus ministry, and just said, "We can do this," and used his own money and started buying buses and selling buses and painting buses, and created this incredible bus ministry. And they needed somebody, and he confided in me that they needed somebody, and did I know of anybody? And I said, you're looking at him. And so it had been during that time. By that point, I had my wife and I had been married for a few months, and I could not hold in my feelings about the ministry. And we sat down and we both shared that we felt the same way and we wanted to move on. So we did.
Yeah. However, Chuck didn't have the same sentiment or did not share that sentiment, did he?
No. The thing is that when anybody ever went to another ministry, it was because they were sent out. You know, the church, wherever some church would have Chuck come and speak and then say, "Oh, we'd like to get a campus ministry going," or something like that. And so he would pick one or two people to go out and interview, and then one of them would get the job. And then basically, Crossroads had sent them out. Chuck had sent them out, and there would be that connection and whatever else. Nobody had ever gone out and gotten a job without Chuck's approval or without him even knowing it. And essentially, Emily and I snuck out of town on the 4th of July weekend, and went, interviewed, accepted the job. And the day I came back, I had to load up and take a bunch of teenagers and all of the recording equipment that our tape ministry, as we called it back then, was going to need for some activity up in DC. So I did that and then came back when it was all over, unloaded the bus, unloaded all the stuff, walked into Chuck's office and said, "I'm moving to Oklahoma."
And the following Sunday, I guess they wanted to announce your departure, and Chuck preached on the very interesting topic with a spin. Was that the case?
Yes. Yes, actually, the week they announced it was at the end of Vacation Bible School, where we had just
Okay.
had 1,000 kids in attendance, which was from all over the community. We ran buses and things like that. It was a big. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Yes, yeah, that's what it was. It was after that, and so we were kind of in a celebratory deal from the church's standpoint. And I knew that they were going to announce my departure. Um,
Mhm.
and so I had asked one of the elders, or the elders were going to make the announcement. I wasn't going to. I was just going to sit in the back. And the sermon, just very interestingly, was on the prodigal son, but it was a very different take on the prodigal son. It was a negative
Mm.
take, and how the prodigal son didn't appreciate what he had, and that he went against, he disgraced his family, and then he messed up, and then he came crawling back, and this sort of. And I was sitting beside a gentleman who was a few years older than me, married, and we had kind of gotten together to have a married couple to just be close to that was older than us, because we were newly married. And he looked at me and said, "Do you think this is about you?" And I said, "Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is." And
Mhm.
so when it was over, all of that, it was a very uncomfortable thing. Fortunately, I was sitting kind of near the back, not where I normally would sit, near the front with all my teenagers. I was kind of trying not to be in the spotlight. And when it was over, then the elders came down. I can't remember which one, but and just announced that I was leaving and spoke highly of me. And pretty soon somebody clapped, and then others clapped, and then pretty soon everyone was clapping, and then everybody was standing.
Mhm.
The last two people to stand were Sam Lang and Chuck Lucas.
Mhm.
It was a very uncomfortable. It was very
Right.
uncomfortable.
Right.
And I got my timing wrong. We were actually starting Vacation Bible School the next day, not finishing.
Okay.
We were starting it. So the next day, I'm over running the Vacation Bible School from wherever needs I had. I had wonderful teams of people to help, just lots of people. And when it's all over, I go back to my office, and uh, I had a small office, and there was another one that was right beside me. And when I got back, the wall had been torn down between the two offices. And I was informed that Sam Lang would be moving into that area because he needed bigger space. And I could just take my stuff wherever. So I did. I just took it home. I mean, it was like, well, you're gone, and we can't wait to see the last of you. So
Oh, wow.
it was
Yeah.
awkward. It was awkward, and everything, but I had a lot of friends, a lot of support, a lot of normal, regular people that that loved us and cared for us and stuff like that. But the higher echelon of, they just kind of went with the attitude that came from the top. The elders were very supportive.
Mhm. Right. So then at this time, you went to Oklahoma for a stint and then eventually moved on to Fort Collins, Colorado,
Hmm.
and the Christian camp was very impressed with your kids, and then they needed a minister, if I recall.
Right. We took. I was at Garnett Road for a few years, and we heard about this Christian camp in Colorado, and it was actually had been connected to it was connected to a church that had a campus ministry happening
Mhm.
there. That had originally, the first campus ministry had been Andy Van Buren, um, who was one of the very first guys to get sent out. The church that he had been a part of, like so many others, ended up splitting off, although he was not there when it happened. So he really, but there were, they became that divide about how are we going to do things and stuff like that. And so they split off and became the Rocky Mountain Church of Christ. And we heard about this wonderful camp that they had. So we took a load of kids on a bus out there, had a great time. And they were, like I say, they were impressed with the ministry that we were doing with our kids at Garnett. And so after I was removed at Garnett for reasons never given, but later found out had to do with money. Um, anyway, so I continued. We worshipped in another church, and I took kids from that group out there too. So we had that beginning of a rapport, and they needed a minister, and I kept telling them, "I'm not a preacher, guys," and everything. But they continued to pursue it, and so we went out there, and we were there for 2 years.
Mhm. And then things get a little bit, well, complex in my mind, at least, because Chuck gets outed, and it was discovered that there were recurring sins, I think was the term, but he was fired in 1985, and then it's mentioned in the Gainesville Sun. And, kind of interestingly, you mentioned the almost idolatry or worship of Kip. And I think it's been observed by others that, you know, it was always mentioned very positively by Kip and others up until this point, and then there's almost like deadly silence where there's nothing about Chuck. So then, certainly there's the Boston movement dynamics as well. So tell us a bit about that. What's going on in like 1985?
In '85, I had I had moved to Fort Collins in August. I had not attended the Florida Evangelism Seminar for a few years, but our campus minister had gone, a guy named Dave Michaels, and then came back, and it was during that period of time that Chuck was released. It wasn't. It wasn't uh, for 2 weeks after he was released that I even knew about it. Although my campus minister did. One of the things that we dealt with when we were interviewing to go to Fort Collins was is that there were many people that were for me, but there were also others on the selection team or whatever. It was a very young church that didn't feel like I was Crossroads enough.
Mm.
And I wasn't, and they kind of wanted that aspect, and others didn't, and so our campus minister at the time was one who didn't think I was Crossroads enough. So he came back knowing what had just occurred and didn't tell me. I got a call actually from I believe I got the call from Jerome Williams, who we had been friends years before. We had worked together in ministry, and he told me. I was shocked when I heard it, and I didn't know why. Um, and so I remember I wrote a letter to one of the elders. That's back when you wrote letters,
Right.
and just said, I've heard this news, and honestly, the arrogance of Chuck, to me, I'm so glad that you finally removed that, that, and I thought it was just over arrogance and putting himself in, whatever. And so I don't know, a few weeks later, we were in the process of selecting elders for this church. And so I invited Brother Whitehead to come out and to speak to the church, because he was an elder that I really respected and I loved him. And, he had been a great example to me, I felt like. So I invited him to come out for the weekend and talk to our church about elders and role of elders and stuff like that. So we're sitting at my house, and he said, "Oh, by the way, your letter, you mentioned that, you were glad we finally dealt with Chuck's arrogance," and said, "That's not why we fired him."
Yeah.
And
Indeed.
then I started hearing bits and pieces. It was before internet, so
Hmm.
it would
Right.
just, I guess it would be more like rumors. When I actually came back to Gainesville, the elders told me that if I wanted to know the specifics, they would tell me. But I said, that puts me in a really awkward position because you haven't told the church. And if you tell me and don't tell the church, so unless the church is going to know, I don't want to know.
Right.
It was awkward. I mean, and it was a lot of years before heard any of the more specific rumors, I guess you could say. And honestly, during my time there, that was not something I ever thought.
Correct. Yeah. So then I think, you know, it was certainly a surprise in 1985. It was certainly a bombshell, and it was picked up by the Gainesville press as well. I
Yeah.
found
Oh, yeah.
the thing.
Yeah.
And of course, the church had to give their official statement, and they still kind of covered it up. And it wasn't, as you said, until a number of years later where they were more specific about uh, perhaps his relationships with various people in his circle. So that's very unfortunate. Um, so it seems that, a number of the Crossroads men had been sent out by this point in time in the mid 80s, so 1985. And of course, very prominently figuring into that, Kip McKean had kind of taken the flagship Boston Church of Christ. And so some people in the Crossroad or within the mainline churches of Christ, sorry, were viewing this as like the Boston movement. And I understand that even some of the Crossroads men had been planted in the Denver area, uh, and were setting up some of the Crossroads Dynamics, and they were kind of at least positively inclined towards Boston.
Yes. Before Chuck was fired, just
Mhm.
there had been a plan for a period of time, I guess, to plant a church in Denver.
Hmm.
Up to that time, Crossroads had never planted churches. What they had done is they had sent out campus ministries. But in almost every one of those cases, the dynamic between the mainline church and the campus movement would clash. And then what would happen is the church would split, and, that seemed to be a going thing. And I think they might have got the idea from Boston. I can't remember, but the idea was, rather than do that, from what I can understand, let's just plant a church in a large town
Hmm. Right.
and start just with our people and just do our thing and not split a church, that sort of thing. And so that had been planned for some period of time, I guess. And then Marty Wooten was sent to Denver. Now,
Hmm.
prior to that, there had not been a campus ministry in Denver. There had been campus ministries at Fort Collins, where Andy Van Buren had started it, in Boulder, where Tom Brown had started it. And they were about the same time. And then there was uh, Colorado Springs. And I think that was Willie Flores, if I'm not mistaken. So those had
Hmm.
been different churches that were out there. So this was a new concept. And so Marty came out there and began to reach out to the other churches that had were friendly towards Crossroads, let's say, that had us guys that had been there. And so that's what Marty did, and he kind of gave off the thing that he wanted to be the central guy for that area, and that wanted to have like staff meetings, sort of thing. I don't know, was it once a week or every couple of weeks or something, in Denver at his father's house. His father had been, prior to that, he had been one of the elders at Crossroads, and he was very wealthy. And so when Marty went to Denver, his parents went too, and so that was it. I I was resistant because I had really wanted to remove myself from some of those Crossroads controlling factors, I guess you would say. I just felt like there was
Hmm.
just too much controlling factor. And in my view, that yes, I actually understood some of the things that we did early in our ministry about double dating and things like that, because this was the flower child generation. This was the drug, this was the free love kind of thing and stuff like that. And so the heart was, we need to try to help these people not get into stupid temptation situations.
Right.
And so the idea, I think, originally was, we want to encourage double dating, encourage, setting yourself some boundaries or something like that. Well, as we all know, what started out as maybe good ideas, became rules. And then they
Right.
became such rules that if you broke them or bent them, you were in trouble or in for a rebuking session or something. Not sure how I got off on that, but
Yeah, it's a
that
good
was
tangent.
that was kind of that I had been kind of put off by the going from guidance to rules. I didn't care for that.
Yeah,
And
we'll
I
we'll pick
felt,
up this side. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we're definitely going to pick up. I have notes where, I'm sure it's triggered by Marty Wooten clamping down on dating rules, and that's what
Yeah, yeah,
probably
yeah.
brought up this conversation. And you actually had to undo it and you thought things were getting very legalistic. Um,
Yes.
but we'll talk about that more. Anyway, keep on going.
Yeah. So anyway, Marty just seemed to want to be in charge of that area.
Hmm.
In the meantime, um, the elders had visited out there, and my wife and I, well, the church in Fort Collins had hired an older gentleman who just wanted to get out of Boston.
Mhm.
to come. And we had a situation where we had two elders, and one of them really didn't want to stay an elder, and we didn't have any more choices. And so Jerry Jones suggested that Don Fike come maybe be on our staff and be a possible elder. That was a very awkward situation because I didn't really know what my role was going to be when this guy comes in who kind of has had experience in being the preacher, and you know who was going to do what. So that was really awkward. So I decided to just step out of the way. Uh, when I had visited with Crossroads elders, particularly Brother Whitehead, I believe, and they were needing help back in Gainesville,
Mhm.
and the consensus was that an old familiar face, you know,
Right,
perhaps could help out with, because of my VBS time and my youth ministry time and stuff like that, and the fact that I you know was a different voice. And they had hired Joe Woods, and he was a different type personality too, and it looked like
right,
maybe we can help this thing heal. And
right,
so that was the thought. And I had been assured that the things that I saw going on in Boston were not going to be taking place. This was during the period of time that Boston had begun to send people in and get the locals to go back to be retrained
right.
and
So
never come back.
the year's 1987. So Crossroads wanted to rebuild and heal. They called you up to see if you'd return.
Hmm.
And let's take it aside because you hinted on that retraining portion. So you specifically knew of what happened in Atlanta, and it's a telling tale. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, I it was agreed that Joe Woods and I would talk every week and just kind of get to know each other and things like that. And one of the things I said straight up, if there is any idea that Crossroads is going to become a part of the Boston movement and come under Kip and come under all this stuff that I see, uh, you going to Boston and being replaced with somebody else and you never coming back, then I don't want this,
Hmm.
because between the time that the elders and I first talked, I think was when these things were really starting to take place. And you'd see Tom Brown was going to Boston and Sam Lang was going to Boston. And I'm seeing this thing and I'm going, they ain't going back. Kip's, this was during the time when they used to talk about hostile takeovers
Right. Corporate
in
America.
business. And I'm going,
Yeah.
these are hostile takeovers. I mean, I don't know who's not seeing this, but I'm always the smartest guy in the room, I guess. But no, I'm going, I don't like the looks of this. And I don't think those guys are going to go back. And Kippy's got his Kippies, in here. And pretty soon, in some cases, they were selling the churches for the money and giving it to Bob, just all kind of stuff. It's just like, no, I don't like this. And but Joe had assured me, no, this is not going to be the case and stuff like that. And I don't remember at what point, because I think we were about 4 months from the time we agreed to move to the time we did, because we were expecting a child and we had to wait till he was born to be able to keep our insurance and all of that. And the church where we were at didn't want us to leave. And so they were
Hmm.
happy for that. So in the meantime, shortly before it's time for us to go, I can't remember which happened first, but Denver had a quote unquote seminar of some sort and brought Kip in, which I thought, I don't like the looks of this.
Right.
I wonder how Crossroads feels about this, because this is Crossroads' plan. So I went down. Uh, uh, I don't know, one of the days or so, I went down and I listened to Kip speak. And I listened to what other people were saying and just what was going on in the Denver area. And Jerry Jones knew I was going to. Jerry Jones and I were talking. I was trying to seek his advice about, what about going back to Crossroads? And he called me after it was over. He said, "So what do you think?" And I said, "I think I witnessed the birth of a new denomination."
Mm-hmm.
I just, it was so, and again, it was the kind of adulation that had been poured on Chuck was now being poured on Kip. And it
Right.
was like, I've known this guy a long time. I mean, he's just a normal guy. Maybe not all that normal in some respects, but he's not Jesus, and so, and then just about that time, we're like 2 weeks, I think, away from moving, and Joe calls me for our weekly conversation. He said, "Well, there's something I need to tell you." And I said, "Okay." He said, "I've decided to go to Boston for further training."
Yep. And then
We
he
had
took a
all,
number of people with him, didn't he?
well, when he went to Boston, it was just him.
Oh, that's him.
He went
Okay.
up there and it was like, "I can assure you that I'm going to come back,"
Mm-hmm.
and everything. And my role in coming to Crossroads was supposed to be the associate minister, meaning that I would probably have some role in some ministry and that I would preach about maybe a couple of times a month when you consider Sundays, Wednesdays, Sunday nights, or something like that. I would occasionally speak, which I was comfortable with. I was not comfortable. I'm not a preacher. I can't
Right. A
come up
weekly.
with three
Right.
things a week and hit a home run. I'll ground out two of them, maybe hit a single. But if you give me a month, I might get a double. And so I came here. Well, we agreed to go ahead and come. I didn't. I was uncomfortable with it, but he assured me, "Oh, no, no, it's not going to be that way." And so I get here thinking, okay, what's my role going to be? And I'm informed that he's leaving the campus minister in charge, Mike Fix,
Mm-hmm. Right.
who was probably at least 10 years younger than me,
Mm-hmm.
maybe more. And that Mike Fix was going to disciple me. And that
Awkward.
Mike Fix was going to do the preaching. I wasn't. And that I would be in charge of the singles ministry. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little bit of a different kind of thing. I'd never met Mike Fix before, but in retrospect, he kind of fit the Boston mold, and ultimately ended up there. Um, so that's how that occurred. Um, and as you alluded to, just out of kind of a respect thing, I called Marty when I found out that I was going to be in charge of the singles, Marty Wooten, because he had been at one point in the singles. And I
Yes.
said, "So I'm going back to your old job. Got any advice?" And
Mm-hmm.
he said, "Yeah." He said, "Clamp down on the dating rules and just, show them who's in charge." I'm going, "Okay, thanks for your advice." I didn't
Mm-hmm.
intend to take it, but I just thought, I'll just, see what he's got to say. So that led to the story that I have told you before, that we moved to town. It was 100 degrees out and the humidity was about 96, and it was awful. We were coming from 15% humidity in Colorado. We're trying to unload our stuff, and the movers had put a lot of it in the garage. And so I'm coming in and out of the garage and I'm about to pass out. And I get a call from a young man in the singles group, said, "I really need to talk to you." And I said, "Well, I've agreed that I'm going to spend 1 week not coming into the office because we got 4 kids under the age of 7. One's 4 weeks old. And we're going to try to get this house settled before I start. But if you want to come over, we can sit on the front porch." I figured the front porch would make a short visit. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
So he came, sat down and said, "So what's so important?" He said, "Well, me and Margaret, we've been going out for a while. And I just wondered if it'd be okay this weekend if I held her hand."
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the look on my face was revealing, as I had no idea it had gotten to that.
Right.
None.
You mentioned that he
Holding
was in.
a hand. So I said, yes, of course you can hold her hand. Don't ever ask me that again. And I think you know where you shouldn't put your hands. You're a grown man. So get out of here. So
Yeah, he was in
it
his
was at
early
that point
30s.
I began to understand how much things had changed. Because after I left Crossroads, I didn't go back much. I because I wasn't really welcome back.
Hmm.
I mean, by Chuck. I mean, I was the rebel, and so I didn't go back for all the seminars and things like that. I just didn't. So that prompted the devotional that I have told you about, where we had our first devotional, and I introduced myself and I said, next week I want you to be prepared to come, and I'm going to outline the Denny's dating rules. And you could see the look of uh I don't know, horror was the word, but you could just see that look of, oh Lord, what's next?
Yeah. Hmm.
So I kind of wanted to make it a little bit dramatic just because it just did. So we went a little longer in the singing, and then I stood up and I said, everybody, I want you to get pencil and paper. You got one. Because I want to be sure there's no misunderstanding about what my rules are going to be. And so I said, okay, rule number one, be pure. Everybody got that? I let there be the pregnant, the whole thing. I wanted to make a big impact on this. I said, if you got that, rule number two, use your head. Got that? Okay. Rule number three, there is no rule number three. Two rules are be pure and use your head. And if you don't intend to be pure, then I can't give you enough rules to change it. The average age in here is 32. Now start dating.
Hmm.
Just we're throwing all that out. And it was like somebody had released hostages. I mean, it was just it just made sense to me. I mean, I felt like that what was happening through the Crossroads and Boston movement was we were creating people who would never grow up.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, if someone has good intentions but they mess up, they're likely to learn from the mess up a whole lot more than never being allowed to make the mess. It was like helicopter parenting or something to the nth degree. And so I just said, that's it. And if you screw up, then we'll talk, you know,
Right.
and you straighten it
I
out.
think you accused Crossroads of, kind of raising a generation of people who can't think for themselves. And
Yes.
dating was just the prime example. It was like it started as guidelines, and then they would add rules and everybody wanted to add more rules. And then, of course, it's hard to take away rules.
Hmm.
So, suggestions become rules and more rules. And then,
Exactly. And I understood the initial suggestion because I know where I came from. I know we weren't Church of Christ kids that had been, or we weren't Baptist kids or something like that just came and got baptized and did we were kids that were coming right out of the world. You had kids coming in fraternities and stuff like that. And that was understandable to have some guidelines, to have some guardrails or something along the lines, but not the never ending rules that the next person has to come in and toughen up on those to show that they're boss.
Right. So maybe we'll take a different aside. So Boston actually noticed you at this point in time, and they started to court you. Yeah, this is 1987 still. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, Boston noticed me, but they noticed me as a problem,
Wow.
um, because I wasn't buying into the thing. And also, I think it wasn't maybe too much of a surprise because I had left the Crossroads thing to a certain degree, all the control factors and stuff like that, and just all of that. So Joe's in Boston, and I'm a problem. So Joe convinces the elders that I should be sent up to Boston for a visit,
Mm,
so I could see what's going on, and
mhm,
ultimately to be, you know, manipulated, I guess you would say, would be the word. I did not want to go, um, but the elders insisted that I go. This was this was in close to Christmas, about 1987. It was
mhm,
cold. I remember that. And they wanted me and my wife and our 4-month-old baby, or maybe he was six, I don't know, 5, 6, whatever. So we reluctantly we flew to Boston at the elders' demand that
mhm,
Joe had kind of put there. And we got there, and it was one of the most difficult experiences because everything was a setup, because I think Boston and Joe at that point saw me as a problem for getting Boston to get in, that I was going to be an issue.
mhm, mhm,
So we get picked up at the airport, and we're driving. Joe and his wife are living in New Hampshire, and as we're kind of maneuvering Boston, Joe says to me, "Are you good at directions?" And I said, "Yeah, you lost?" He said, "Oh no." He said, "You're going to be having dinner with Sammy and Jerry Lang tonight, and so just hopefully you can find your way there." They go, "I thought I was here to visit with you, you know." "Oh no, you're going to be, Sam and Jerry wanted to have you over," which was a little difficult because Sam and Jerry, you know, they were fine people, but Sam and I never connected at all. It was
mhm,
the ministry in that at the front of the house was Chuck and Sam. You know, my office was for several years in the back in my
mhm, mhm,
classroom, and I just wasn't a part of the in crowd. I never got invited to do anything. Never been to Sam's house. Kind of knew where he lived, but I mean, we just didn't interact. He was Chuck's man, and and I wasn't, which was fine with me. So I thought that kind of strange. It's like, okay, so we went there and we're having dinner, and as we're eating, Sam says, "Oh, Wyndham and Jeannie Shaw are going to come by. They want to see you." I'm going, that's just odd. This is,
mhm,
we're being set up.
mhm,
So we're sitting there talking, and I don't remember exactly how things came up, but they wanted to know what were my concerns or what my. And it was like, yeah, oh, we just value I don't know. And so the one thing I remember about the conversation, other than the fact that I wasn't buying in, was that Jeannie Shaw, whose dad and mom were brother and sister Whitehead, Brother Whitehead was an elder, she began to say that her parents, because they were not discipled in the Boston movement, were not Christians, they were not disciples. And I'm sitting there, I can't believe I'm hearing this,
mhm.
because Dick Whitehead is one of the most godly men I
Oh yeah.
know. And yeah, he had his faults, and he maybe the elders didn't deal with Chuck like they should have, when they should have, but this man was a godly man. And I'm just in disbelief. And so we just kind of weather it through the deal and go on. And as I recall, the next day, I think that was a Saturday night, the next day was church. So we get to church. It's in the Boston Garden. There's, I don't know how many thousands of people there. We
Right.
find a seat. I did notice that there were people going around getting the collections of other people, and I didn't understand that, but I later learned what that was all about. And I saw some people there that were visiting that I had known through the years that were,
Hmm.
I don't remember who it was now, but I remember thinking there's some well-known people here from, the Crossroads days, and some of them were there checking it out. So we sit down and, Kip gets ready to speak, and he said, before I start, I just want to recognize that there is a man here who has had a huge impact on the youth ministry. And I'm thinking, who's here? And then he says my name, and I'm going, and he has me stand up in front of 3,000 people. I'm going, well, if you believe that, how come you never had me come up here and speak?
Hmm.
What is this all about? Because he would have people come. They had youth activities, and I'm going, I think somebody's trying to stroke my ego. So I
Yep.
sat down, made it through the service, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm ready. This is enough. I need a break. And Joe tells me as we're getting ready to go, he said something about let's get lunch. He said, oh yeah, we're having lunch with Al and Gloria Baird. I'm going, that's kind of odd. This guy's an elder and his wife, and there's all these other people that are here, and we're having lunch. Again, it's like, this just doesn't pass the smell test. So we ended up being at this fancy lobster restaurant, and my wife's looking at me like, we can't afford this. And I'm thinking, no, we can't afford it. But if Al doesn't pay and the Boston church doesn't pay, then my elders are getting the bill for this. I'm having to go through it. So it was kind of pleasantries and stuff like that. And at some point, Al looks at me and says, Denny, you have a lot of insight into the churches in the South. What do you think we can do to improve our relationship with the churches in the South? And I looked at him straight in the face and said, I think you should probably start by repenting for what y'all did in Atlanta.
Hmm. So
Um,
take us down that road a little bit.
yeah,
What did they
well,
do?
they took over the church in Atlanta, or they tried to. But they split it all up. And if it weren't for a couple of people who had the keys to the building and changed the locks, they would have actually ended up with the building. But they split the church there. I
Hmm.
don't remember the entire story, but that was one of the first takeover attempts, uh, that happened. And uh, that's where Sam Lang had been. But
Right.
there were a couple of people who were more sure of themselves and more sure, as adults, who stepped up and said, mm-mm, no. It took as many people they wanted to take over the church, as I recall. And it created a
Right.
mess. And I just suggested that it'd be a good place for them to start with, we repent. That did not go well.
Right.
And the rest of the time was pretty awkward. And Joe was about dying. Joe Woods was about dying because he was supposed to be trying to get control of me, and I wasn't buying it.
Hmm.
So we did that, and the next day was Monday, and I grew up in Maine, and Joe was living in New Hampshire, and so part of the agreement was we would borrow his car and take a trip up to Maine. So we went up. My family had not seen our newborn son, and so we went up and we spent a day, and drove back late that night, purposely trying to get there too late for anybody else to be up. And
Right.
think, okay, all right, Tuesday, what's up for Tuesday? We're flying out Tuesday afternoon. And we get up and Joe says, okay, now we're going to go to the meeting, what am I trying to say? The ministry meeting of all this, the staff meeting. It was a huge number of people there. I don't know how all those people were on staff. There's probably 40 people in there. Oh, good Lord. I've heard about these because the staff meeting notes would get sent to Mike Fix, and then we would have the same staff meeting at Crossroads. I found out.
Interesting.
Yeah, I found out. So we're sitting there, and it's a very uncomfortable meeting. I'm not enjoying it at all. I'm kind of hoping our baby would start crying. So we have an excuse, but okay, we'll do this, and then we can go to lunch and get on the plane and go home. So we get through it, and one of the things that kind of I didn't care about was Kip was just kind of using his put down thing on people with his brother. He said something about his brother getting fat, or just he would always do that. Just kind of do these put downs in a group. I didn't like that, but I wasn't the object of it, so I just said I'll just about to leave. So we get done, and Joe says to me, "Oh, we're having lunch with Kip." You following all of this? I've been, surprised to be with Sam and Jerry, surprised to be with Lyndon, surprised to be, all of that. And so, I'm just going, oh, what else, So I remember we went to Fuddruckers, and Kip was kind of trying to lay it on, about how, whatever, and old friends. And my wife looked at him and said, "Kip, we've never really been friends." And that kind of put a damper on me. It just was, we're just like, get us out of here. So we get in the car, we're headed to the airport. I told Joe, just leave us at the same way, we'll find our way in, and we just wanted to be away from that. So we did. We came back, and on the next day I went in and met with the elders because they wanted to report.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I told them, among other things, that Brother Whitehead, your daughter and your son-in-law don't think that you and your wife are Christians and that you're not saved. That was the turning point in the way things went, because Brother Whitehead was a wonderful person. He always wanted to believe the best about everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
To a fault, I guess you would say, but that's what he wanted to do. But when I told him that and explained some of the other things that had gone on, it was like, something not right here. So we had a staff meeting a couple of days later, I guess, or within a few days. And the elders just kind of put it out there, are you staff members? Are you with us? Or are you, something different? Because we were seeing. They tried to take Tampa. They had tried, other places, and wherever people had left from of note, like Tom Brown or Sammy Lang or this one or that one, that they were, taken over. And so we went around the room, and the staff people were being really, they really weren't answering, And so finally, I just said, what I think what they're asking, guys, is, are you wanting Boston to take us over?
Right.
And I had told the elders, if that's what you want, that's fine, I'll leave. But that wasn't what the elders wanted. And so they still were, not really saying anything. And so a couple of days went by, and then I was getting ready to do the singles devotional. I was at home, and I got a knock on the door. It was one of the elders. And he said, "We need you to come to Brother Whitehead's house right now." And so I got there, and most of the staff had resigned like that.
Yeah. You said all but 5 or something like that.
I think it was all but 5, and 3 of the 4 of us, I believe, or 4 of the 5 of us were considered interns. Yeah, I came here to be the associate minister, and I was labeled an intern when it all said and done. But there was Gordon Dasher, Dale Dykes, me, Baruch Whitehead, and John Whitehead's brother. Dick Whitehead's brother John, who was in his 60s, who was the tape minister, and that was the staff. We lost campus minister, youth minister, Joe Woods. I don't know who all else. There were 17 staff members, and we were left with 5 when it was done. And from there, that was in, I think it was maybe March when that occurred.
Of 88.
But yeah, it wasn't immediately after I had made my Boston trip. But anyway, so that occurred, and then, but the elders let them stay on in their positions for like 3 months, which wasn't a very good idea. But they had resigned, they hadn't been fired. And in the summer that year, we were having the Florida Evangelism Seminar. And while we were there, I don't know how many people loaded up and moved. We lost virtually all of our college ministry. We lost half of our Bible study leaders, some of our deacons, and virtually all of our staff.
Yeah, I was going to insert a little note here that's, whenever Boston kind of swooped in and tried to take over, they would primarily take the sharp people, the people in power, the campus ministers, the Bible talk leaders, or the Bible study leaders. And in a way, it's kind of like the Great Deportation, back in the 6th and 7th century BC, when Assyria and Babylon would kind of come in, they wouldn't take everybody. It was like the upper crust, the aristocracy. And unfortunately, that was kind of what was going on. If you weren't sharp, if you were not a mover and shaker, no, you weren't moved up to Boston for retraining.
No, you weren't. And what Crossroads had been a church that reached out to anybody and everybody. So you would have a lot of people who were quote unquote sharp, but then there's a lot of people who, weren't. I mean, when you're reaching out to anybody and everybody, now you're going to have people that are needy. You're going to have
Absolutely.
people that have issues, that have problems, that are, struggle in many ways and need leadership or need help, or kind of need somebody to help them steady their course. And when you sweep in and you take basically so much of the leadership that can lead, the Bible study leaders, the deacons, the almost the entire college class, and what you're left with is a higher percentage of people who need. And that's what happened to us. It's kind of like a country that loses a war and loses a vast majority of their men. And then you're left with women and children, widows, stuff like that. You're left with a lot of people who have needs, and you don't have the kind of strength that you need to do that. And so there was that immediate release of people just, they chose the week of the seminar to do it. And then as time went on, there was to be more and more attrition. Fortunately for us back in those days, that if you want to make a long distance call, you had to pay for it,
Right.
But there
I
were
remember
a
that.
lot of calls coming from a lot of different directions, a lot from Boston, but then, we had other people who even in the Florida area who had been sent out from Crossroads who were going in that direction as well. So, we were having people moving like to Orlando or, different places like that too. I know that Brother Whitehead felt like, well, we're not going to lose our college kids. I mean, where are they going to go? I mean, they're college students and they're at UF, and UF is, like we had people, leaving and going to University of Central Florida, which at that time was nothing, but just because there was going to be a ministry in Orlando, whatever. So it was very devastating. It really was.
Right. And although you stepped in a little bit reluctantly, but necessarily as a preacher, you oversaw a lot of this. And you also saw that those who resigned or had moved to Boston continued to attack your church, especially verbally, as I understand. I think they used Kip would use um, language and accusing Crossroads as Jerusalem with walls torn down, I believe.
Yes, that was, yeah, that Kip used that. He
Yeah.
talked about, like, that we were like Jerusalem with the walls not down, and we just essentially, we needed them to come in and rebuild the wall, you know.
Mm.
And it became, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. I mean, they could point to us and say, well, that we're not having the baptisms we used to, or we're having this, we're having that. Well, yeah. I mean, when you strip us of the people who are just the more, I keep using the word sharp, but that's what it is.
Right.
The
Okay.
people with more, the multi-talented people, the people in some cases who have the ability to give, not only financially, but who have the ability to lead. And you're left with the people that they don't want. They didn't come in and try to get the people who had difficult personalities or struggled with poverty, or you know who knows whatever else, or just unusual people. Because when the church reaches out, they're going to get some unusual people. We have them, but they, pretty soon that percentage of the population was a lot of people that had needs, and we didn't have the leadership to meet the needs like we had before. So it was hard. It was hard, and it began just a slow death.
Hmm. Yes, I understand it was very difficult on you, very stressful, and you were there for just over 2 years, but then you became a salesman for the Book of
Yes.
Life for Zondervan, and that was less stressful. I can't imagine that. It's like
The That's
sales
the
job
funny
is pretty
story
stressful.
I tell is that, I mean, I was having heart issues. um
Hmm.
I had gone to a doctor, and she said, either you can take medication, or you can get away from your stress, whatever it is. I didn't tell her what it was. I just said I'm stressed, and my heart was doing irregular heartbeats and stuff like that. And I just said, I got a family. I don't want to take medicine so I can stay in this stress. And
Right.
so, yeah, I attended this thing that I saw in the paper where they were looking for salespeople to sell this product called Zondervan Book of Life, and it was a 26 volume set of books that sold for between $300 and $500, depending on what kind of cover you got. I looked at it and go, it's a great product. I can see how people could use this, because it was great for families that wanted to sit down and have family devotionals or something like that, and a place to start rather than they have to come up with something. So I think it was October when I saw that or something, and I kept watching the video over and over again of a presentation of how to sell it, and the stress is building, and it's just, and so finally I went to the elders and I just said, I'm done, and
Hmm.
this is what I'm going to do. And I kind of laugh about it. So I went from a pretty good salaried position with a few benefits to total commission sales with no benefits, nothing, total commission, to reduce my stress.
Hmm. Yeah, that was a lot.
And it did. And
Hmm.
um I mean, I'm sorry about the circumstances that did it, um, and everything, but I had to think about my family. I did not want my kids to grow up and hate church like I see so many have.
Right. Absolutely.
I didn't. I did not want. I just didn't want that. I didn't want that.
And then after this, the Crossroads still has a bit of a complicated legacy where I think some people at your newer church um, thought you were like a Crossroads plant or trying to, supplant their leadership or, something like that. while you were
Yeah,
clearly not trying to do that.
yeah. We stayed. It's hard to stay at a church where you were on staff
Yep, of
and
course.
not be having people come up to you and you know, express their grievances or their hurts or their feelings or something like that, and at the same time perhaps have staff that you had nothing ever worked with or nothing to do, but has been hired, and they are a little bit concerned about having you there.
Hmm.
And so I would highly recommend to anybody that's watching, if you're ever in that position, find another church.
Yeah,
Um, and that's hard. And it was particularly hard because in this town, not being all that big, and Crossroads with the strong reputation that it had,
right.
and having started as 14th Street, a split off the traditional church that was there, there was there was I guess 30, 40 years of bad feelings, you know,
Mm,
that started when some people said we want to start a church near campus, and you know, and they essentially took the land that had been bought and started it. So that started it. And then when Crossroads came along, and then what would happen is if people left Crossroads but decided to stay in church, they would go over to University City and then badmouth
yep.
Crossroads, you know. And so it was, you know, it just wasn't, you know, an easy thing. And so we at one point said we just need to leave here. And so we went to University City, and all we wanted to do was just sit and soak and recover, you know? And we made a few friends. We had some friends that were there. We made some new friends, and we just tried to be peripherally involved. But I didn't want any leadership role. I didn't want anything like that. And at some point, one of the elders called me in to meet with him by himself and started accusing me of having all kinds of notions about trying to, you know, bring Crossroads there, like I was, you know, a plant. So we decided we can't go here.
Hmm.
So we went back to Crossroads for, I don't know, a couple of years, and it just wasn't working out. And so the thing was is that one of the things I'm proud of us for doing is that we did not abandon our faith. We didn't just
Hmm.
say,
Yeah,
okay, we had a bad experience, we're leaving and we're done. And that's one of the biggest hurts that I feel, and the I guess an anger that I feel towards Boston and, you know, whatever. How many people, good-hearted people, came there with the desire to know God, to know Jesus, to get their lives right, had an experience that has pushed them so far away, and what they think of when they think of God, Jesus, whatever, is that's him. It's not,
right.
you know. And so throughout all of our struggles, we've always maintained a relationship with the local church. Hadn't always been great, but again, hey, I was on staff and I was human.
Right.
Elders are human, staff's human, stuff like that, you know. Uh, but I just think that the devil has had a foothold through the way that people have been treated and turned on.
No, absolutely. And, sometimes I think about my own conduct because I'm, as a Christian myself, I think about I'm an ambassador for Christ, and what does that look like? And certainly, I think about how my conduct reflects on when I'm communicating about Jesus, and it's one of my biggest takeaways. Like sometimes in the last month or so, I've been an activist 30 years, and a little less than you, of course, in talking about Crossroads. But so one of the biggest takeaways for me is to reflect on how I, you know, reflect Christ, and what do my words, but also more importantly, what do my actions say about what I believe, and to properly, reflect that about God. So it's raising, a generation who can't think about for themselves, or
Mm,
that, I'm imposing my rules as opposed to like really,
right.
showing Jesus for who he is weighs on me too.
Hang on a second, Chris. We
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so
Well, it's
much.
great to talk to you. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much.